So hello, welcome to another episode of Rustacean Station. I'm your host, Alan Wyma. Before we start, I'm excited to share that we're hosting Rust Asia Conference 2025 on March 28th in Hong Kong. This is your chance to dive into the world of Rust in Asia and beyond. We've already got Tim McNamara, the author of Rust in Action, as our keynote speaker, and more speakers will be announced soon. We're still open to speaker proposals until December 31st, so get yours now. Check out all the details at www.rustasaconf.com. Now back to the episode. Today we have Daniel Thompson, co-founder of Tauri, on the show to talk about Tauri 2.0. Is it Tauri or Tauri? It was difficult for me to pronounce this one. I'm sure you hear both pronunciations.
I say Tauri, you say Tauri. Yeah, just call it what you like. I think my pronunciation is sort of based on tau. You know, like you have pi and tau, and one of them is the more appropriate circle constant, and it's actually the one that's spelled with T. I love tau as a circle constant. I'm a woodworker, you know, and knowing things about the circumference and diameter are a lot easier than knowing things about the radius. So I love tau. And, back when we were talking about the names, I was a proponent of the binary star system type called a Tauri star system. There's hundreds of them out there, probably thousands, maybe even more, that we can see in our galaxy anyway. And way back in the day when we were trying to figure out a name for this project, I was really, really fascinated with circle constants, pi and tau. And I I don't know. I spent a lot of time in the wood shop, and it's easier to measure a diameter than a radius in a lot of cases in the real world. And so I think tau is obviously the more important circle constant because you don't have to divide by 2 all the time, right? And anyway, that's why I've always said Tauri. I've heard Tauri. I think, as long as people know what we're talking about and what Tauri is, that's more important than how you pronounce it. And I guess just to give your listeners, our friends out there in the Rust community, a quick, brief reminder of what Tauri is. Tauri is a framework for building apps for the desktop and mobile ecosystems. And it uses, in most cases, a system web view in order to build a user interface with HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and all of that web goodness. And it uses a Rust core, which provides applications with heavy lifting powers, but it's also a great binary harness. People love Tauri because the final binaries are like 3 to 8 megabytes in size across the platforms. They have been gulfed down to around 550 kilobytes. And we also don't care where your HTML and CSS and JavaScript stuff comes from because, you can, if you really love types as much as we do, write everything in Rust. You can write your front end in Vue and Dominator, and guess what? You can share all those types inside of one programming ecosystem. And then, those frameworks just render it out to bundles that get consumed inside of the browser context. So the benefits of these small binaries is that as your apps get more and more traction, which means more and more people downloading them, you are using less electricity for the transit of these apps. You're using less time to transport them across the network. And even places like India and Africa that skipped the desktop generation of computing and are all mobile, especially in those places, it's important that we keep binary sizes down. And that's because maybe the connection isn't great, or maybe people are paying for traffic per megabyte. And, every megabyte does add up. So keeping your binaries small is really important to consider in this time where not only is everything supposed to be super secure, we're also supposed to start protecting the environment, and we have to keep users safe and if people are using AWS buckets to store their apps for people to download, totally legit use case. But if your app weighs 500 megabytes and you have 10 million users downloading it every month, multiple times, that's where cloud costs are going to hit you.
I mean, there's a lot to say in all this stuff. I totally forgot that, yeah, you could use the whole app in Rust. One of the things that I never actually played with it before, it's something that's on my radar to do at some point, but I remember building these kinds of apps where you would use Electron or there was another one for mobile apps. I forgot what it's called. I think it's Phone Gap. I think it's changed its name to Cordova, right?
Phone gap, Cordova, capacitor, right.
Yeah, and it was just like as a developer who then can see the app and see what it's like, oh, this is a web page. I don't really like that experience. It doesn't feel quite right. It just wasn't so attractive to me. But the attractive thing about everything that you just mentioned is actually the attractive part to me, like that you could have your app, somewhere else and get downloaded, and it's like you said, 500 kilobytes. That's quite attractive for markets that, like you said, don't have generous amount of data that people can download. Or in case maybe you are traveling and you have to pay for every kilobyte, I mean, that could be a big difference. But the other thing that's really attractive is that you focus on security. That I think is quite interesting because not a lot of these other frameworks focus on security as much as I think you guys do.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with our release cadence. So with version 1 and with version 2 that's about to come out as a stable release, our process is to collect ideas during the alpha phase of the project and work on these ideas and give them structure and thought and review and take our time in the alpha. And alpha is never a point in time where anybody should be picking up Tauri who's not actively working on the engineering for it, because everything changes every day. It's basically like bleeding edge dev branch. Once though we're happy with that thing that we've built and ironed out and revised, at that point we mark Tauri as beta, and in the beta phase, we hand it off to a external security team. For Tauri's case, we've used the same team twice, Radically Open Security, and we've received support from Next Generation Internet and NLNet in order to facilitate those audits. And during the audit, several people who are external pen testers try to break everything they can on every platform we offer. And if they have findings, we take the time to fix those findings. And after we fix those findings, they verify that those findings have been fixed. Then, after all the security concerns are resolved, at that point we mark it as RC. And during the RC phase, that's when we really focus on documentation. And so I know that during beta, people are very eager to pay the early adopter tax. But in our case, the tax is very high because we don't spend that much time writing documentation during beta because we know things are going to change. And Tauri is a small community. It's not a FANG company that can just decide to spin off 100 engineers to solve a problem or hire another 1,000 to write documentation. It's a very, very sincere labor of love. And during the RC phase, that's when we know everything is stabilized. There aren't any new interfaces that are going to come up. There might be minor bug fixes as people in the community start testing things out, but those are par for the course. The moment we release 2.0 stable, it's probably going to be a matter of days before 2.0.1 lands, right? Like that's just the way that software works. But through this approach, we really try to prove our security posture without security theater by actually doing the work. And then internally in the Tauri working group, we continue the focus on security by auditing all pull requests that make their way into a minor release. And this is important because it keeps our security team up to date with the latest things that are in the framework, which has been really helpful for the one or two GHSAs that we've published, because we feel that transparency is part of having a security posture, is saying, yeah, everybody can make mistakes. Even we make mistakes and oversee things. Even auditors oversee things. But as soon as we're aware of them, we'll fix them. And that all adds up into something like a year long, 1.5 year long release process to get from one major to the next major.
Well, the really interesting thing too, I don't think you mentioned this in this recording, right? Is that the reason that the app is so small, actually there's only one way that apps can be small, is that most of your requirements are already on the device, right? So if you're working with a native SDK, you're expecting that stuff to be pre-installed, so you just have your app specific code, maybe some extra things. But the way Tauri works is that you're using the native browser that's built into like the web view, I think they call that, into the OS, right?
Right.
If you talk about security, that doesn't, in my mind, it doesn't make a lot of sense because that's usually quite old and that probably has some insecurities and some vulnerabilities in it, depending which platform, etc. Right?
You're right, but there's also more nuance here. So on the Windows platform, the platform that does web view distribution the best from my perspective, the members of the Edge team that manufacture and maintain and distribute the WebView 2, as it's called on Windows, they use an evergreen approach, which means that the system makes sure that it is up to date with the latest WebView. And Tauri apps, when they're for Windows, they request the local install or they instruct the operating system to grab a web view. User has to agree to it in cases it hasn't been installed already. But as you know, we're in Windows 10 and 11, patched operating systems have this by default. On Mac, it's a different. The Mac ecosystem has the presumption that the user updates their operating system on a regular basis. And doing so by updating the operating system, a new version of Safari is installed on the system that brings the latest version of WebView that Apple provides. On Linux, it's even more nuanced. It's libgtk. So WebKit GTK is what's used for the air quotes system WebView on Linux. And it is a project that's been maintained by our friends over at Agalia. And, you know, the maintenance team isn't very big. I think there's only one or two people on it, and there are some missing features. And so I think the challenge of shipping with a native, an embedded web view, a web view that the system provides somehow, is that you are going to see difference between these platforms. And I mean, I know we're talking about 2.0 right now, but for 3.0, we're going to be addressing this with a couple different options. One of them is going to be looking into using the Verso web view as an optional target. Verso is a sister project to Tauri, if you will, that is making a browser and web view based on the Servo project, the ex Mozilla project that's recently had a kind of renaissance. I'm happy to admit that people from Tauri have been involved in that renaissance and are still involved in that renaissance. And nevertheless, we decided to take it upon ourselves to build a proper, again, in air quotes, a proper web view that is then consumable across all platforms with less variance across platforms. You know, it's a major project, so it's going to take years, of course, to get there. And one thing that we are quite worried about, though, is finding experts to help us with the Linux situation. I'm not sure that WebKit GTK is going to be the long-term solution we're going to stick with, but after 2.0, that's going to be one of the primary team focuses is at least getting to that point. And, you know, to come back to the security focus that you mentioned, because Electron apps use Chromium at a very specific pinned and patched version for every version of Electron, the core library is, in order to resolve security vulnerabilities, now the user has to actively update their app after the developer has actively updated source. And what this means is that, generally speaking, with the velocity of CVEs that are filed against Chromium, that the chances are good the moment you've published an Electron app, there is a vulnerability out there that can theoretically be exploited. And so the thinking behind using a system web view is that the general chance of everybody keeping their app, well, in this case, app Chrome, but their system web view up to date is higher than expecting the entire fleet of every application on every device that is built with Tauri to update it when an update's available.
That does make sense, right? Basically, if they update their computer, which then updates the web view, you're going to get more secure if they are fixing vulnerabilities without you having to do anything. You kind of just get the benefits of that.
Right. I mean, it does take a lot of cognitive load off of the back of developers. And I mean, I've been doing security related work for a long time, and I know there's trade offs that you have to take. Like, just like in serving customers and building products, you cannot fulfill everybody's needs and expectations at the same time. You're going to have to pick and choose your battles and solve the problems that you can solve that have the greatest impact at the least computational expense. And that's why this caveat, oh, the system web view, it doesn't look exactly the same or have the exact same features across platforms, is on the one hand relevant for, developers and engineers considering the products they build, but I've always kind of countered that argument with capability design. You know, when you build an app for a mobile phone, you don't expect that people have a keyboard. You expect that they're going to be multi-touching. You expect that there's going to be GPS available to the device. So you have capabilities that inform the utility. And I think that the challenge that we've faced is that everybody assumes that, oh, it's web tech, so it should do everything that a web browser can. I feel is slightly misguided because it's not being approached from the product perspective of what jobs do I have to get done? What tools are at the disposal of my users? What exactly am I building? And then I think a lot of people will recognize that at scale, at massive, massive scale, choosing the smallest binary is always going to win, just from a financial perspective for yourself. As soon as you start thinking about your customers, who maybe travel, like, I don't know, there's this common example that I like to bring of traveling to Switzerland. I have a Maltese SIM card. Switzerland's not in the European Union. So I immediately switched to roaming. In Switzerland, I get charged something like 10 cents a megabyte for traffic. And then LinkedIn pops up on my phone and it says, hey, do you want to download LinkedIn right now on mobile? It's 150 megabytes. And suddenly I'm like, wait a second. So I'm going to pay 15 euros to download an update for LinkedIn that is always kind of crashing my phone anyway because it's so bloated. Like, it does really have repercussions. And again, like I said, it's a trade-off. And I think that as software engineers, as product engineers, it's really important to understand those chances and opportunities.
That was something I'm thinking about. You brought up this point about the different platforms, right? And if I understood correctly, you're talking more about think about terms of capabilities of the device rather than a specific device and so forth. But I mean, thinking about the different web browsers, I'm consistently making websites for my daily job. And I ask people, hey, can you check this website on your side? Because I don't have a Linux machine. I mean, how can somebody who wants to use Tauri and say support different platforms, Windows, desktop, and I see that in the 2.0 release, you're looking at having at least initial support for mobile, was what my understanding was in the latest blog post. I mean, how can I possibly test my app against these different platforms if I want to actually use them and I want to have a good support, right? And because you're going to have people that just maybe they unplug their computer from the network or they just don't want to update. How can I know what is their experience going to be like? Or maybe they have an iPhone, 7, right? I'm kind of curious about this part. How can I kind of know what that would be like?
You're not wrong. So for Tauri, we do allow you to build iOS and Android applications on your Mac, right? This comes back to the operating systems and underlying hardware that people are using today. Apple does not permit you to build on an operating system that isn't a Mac. Now, I've heard rumors that you can, run a VM, but the point I'm trying to make is that you have to pick and choose your battles. If you want to do everything from your own laptop, I'm going to tell you what it has to be. Today, it has to be a Mac laptop. If you're not running ARM, you're stupid, or you don't have the money, but you really should because it will save you time. And you're running probably a Linux VM, you're running a Windows VM, and you're compiling Mac and Android and iOS natively on the Apple Silicon. And up until the moment of production on this device, you can use the developer mode and see how the app interacts on emulators. For mobile, you can use concrete, discrete devices to see how they work before you've even put them on any app store or even committed any code. You can do this all locally. And the meat of the question that you're talking about, though, is how does one person QA for 1,000 different devices? I mean, come on. That's not how products work. You get a bigger team or you hire people to do QA for you. There are companies out there that will take your app and run it on 17 different versions of Android on different devices. And if you're concerned about the actual quality of it, well, you're going to have to build the APK and install it on 10 different phones and try it out yourself. And you're going to have to actually do that work because that's the way that work is done. And now, Tauri provides a bunch of actions, workflows that you can use in. I think right now it's only available in GitHub, but we're working on making it available for other types of version control systems that lets you leverage the VMs of the GitHub action workflow ecosystem so that you write your code on a Windows machine. You give all of your private keys to secrets inside of GitHub, and then you reference these keys in your actions. And then different virtual machines get spun up and they spit out the binaries that you've configured it to make. And at the end, you've gotten a Mac, a Windows, a Linux, an iOS, and Android, and all the different varieties that you've asked it to build for you. And that's one of those spots where a lot of people get to, but then they forget this thing that you just mentioned. How do I update? Right? Like, that was a qualifying characteristic of Tauri 1.0. I was very adamant about us needing to have an updater that was more secure than the rest of the ones out there so that a developer could decide to send an automatic update to the fleet of users that are using the app. I think what a lot of Rust developers know that web developers maybe have yet to learn is that there is such a thing as done, right? Like, when code compiles, you're done for the day, right? I mean, but there are Rust projects out there that haven't gotten any updates in a long time, and that's because they're done, right? It is possible to have code that is complete and done. And so the notion that an app is done, however, is a red herring because there is going to be an update. There's always an update to an app. You get user feedback, you have to fix it. It's the same with websites. That's why Netlify and Vercel are such amazing services because you change some code, you get a preview, you commit, it's done, it's live, right? But you understand that there are going to be iterations. And without a proper updating system, how are you going to get updated? You're going to just email everybody your binary? Come on, that doesn't work. It doesn't work. No one expects that. They want to have a notification or a pop-up in the app that tells them, hey, it's time to update, or you should update, or you have to update, or this app won't work anymore if you don't update. And that's the part, I think, where a lot of people get stuck. And it's one of the reasons why we built the company CrabNebula out of the Tauri ecosystem, for the Tauri ecosystem, is because building apps is one thing. Almost everybody can do it. Sooner or later, AI is going to be able to do this whole pipeline, and you're just going to prompt and you're going to be happy about it and you're going to ship it with CrabNebula. But that's the part that the sticky part of operationalization of distribution that is so easy to get wrong. It takes a lot of time. It takes actual experience and understanding how this stuff works. And if Tauri is new to you and you've never shipped an app before, you're liable to make mistakes and just waste time. And for hobby projects, all you have is a very small amount of time. For startup projects, like the clock is ticking with every sentence that I'm speaking, your runway is going down. And, we've built a turnkey service where you configure it once, you get your API key, you register your credit card, and your CI sends the application to our cloud, and your users download it from the cloud. And when there's an update, they get a notification from the cloud, and then they pull the right binary from the cloud. And you never have to even think about it. Right. And that's this intuition of helping people solve this is something I probably should have talked a lot more about a long time ago, because I keep on meeting people who are rolling their own, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's going to take you weeks to do, and you're going to be constantly monitoring it, and you're going to have to solve these problems that the people who built Tower actually solved for you already. So, I mean, I'm not here to pitch the company, but I think that, you know, if you decide that it's really important to build software, I think as a coach, as a speaker, what I constantly find myself falling back on is really define for yourself what is good enough, right? Figure out where this app project is going to take you. Because if you have aspirations to turn this into the next WhatsApp or Telegram or TikTok or whatever it is that you're making, if you want to take it far, then you're going to have to really think about these first principles early on. And if you're going to deliver to 5 platforms, you better make sure that somebody is able to commit the time to verify that the app actually works on these 5 platforms. There's not a silver bullet other than doing the work or paying somebody to do the work for you. Maybe you're lucky and it's an open source project and you have a community of people who really want to help and are able to kind of solve the problems alongside of you. But that is also a decision you have to make when you're thinking about software as a product. You have to really be honest with yourself, and it's totally legitimate to do something as a hobby for yourself. And if that turns into something viable later on, then you can evolve with it and grow with it. But I worry that people oftentimes feel that there's this need to reinvent everything all the time. And one of those things that you don't need to reinvent anymore is the distribution side of building software, because the company did it.
That's a good point. I mean, when you just start off something with a new idea, like you said, it's the hobby project. You like to have some kind of idea about what you can support. But I guess if you can look into, who's your client base, what they're going to be using approximately, what version of Windows, how up to date are they? I guess you can kind of have some kind of idea what that browser may have. So I guess there's going to be some legwork and also some type of resource in that. And yeah, of course, legwork is a type of resource, and or maybe money, like you said. Okay, that's a good point. But you started talking more about, you talked a little bit about CrabNebula. Maybe it's good that we kind of bring up what is CrabNebula and how come sometimes you see Tauri and you see CrabNebula and you see those related in some way, whether they're sponsors or whatever of where you're speaking. Because I think that's the first time I saw CrabNebula when we were at Rust Nation.
Sure. So Tauri itself is a nonprofit hosted by the Commons Conservancy in the Netherlands. The proper name is the Tauri program within the Commons Conservancy. And it is fully volunteer based. No one is paid for the time they spend at Tauri from Tauri's donations. So donations go into a large pot. We've used it to pay for the 2 trademarks. And at the same time, we also recognized that we were starting to get questions that we couldn't really answer. If someone comes into your Discord and is like, hey, I need help really urgently, but I can't show you the code because it's proprietary, you get a feeling for who you're dealing with. And that is someone who needs a business partner, right? As a nonprofit with this kind of structure, there's no way for Tauri to sign an NDA, to make a master service agreement, to even write an invoice, right? Let alone allocate human resources to do work for third parties. That's just not in the spirit of volunteerism, and it's not in the spirit of the open source project that we built that deserves to be protected. Out of this understanding that there are services that people would pay for, and there are opportunities to provide premium enterprise support, we decided to raise some venture capital through an amazing group of angels and a wonderful VC, open source software. OSS Capital, led by JJ, helped us find the money to pay not only engineers to work on Tauri. It was a massive lift getting 2.0 done. I don't even know how many hours. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 100,000 hours of time were spent on it, which is a lot. And then that's just not from the company, but also from the volunteers. There's a lot of effort that went into it. And offering a service that is in support of the community is also a great way for the community to, in a way, support Tauri. So it's kind of a cyclical economy, if you will. And the notion is at CrabNebula, we deeply support open source. We support Tauri, we support Solid.js. We also develop products for the larger ecosystems and thereby grow a market. And I mean, it's not a sexy AI startup because we really felt like following these first principles of doing something that is boring and hard in a way that makes it easy for people to use is a service that's needed in the community, right? So that's a bit about the relationship of Tauri and CrabNebula. If you have any problems with Tauri or with Rust, you're welcome to look me up on our Discord or come find us at the websites. And yeah, I'm happy to help.
But I think you were kind of mentioning before that CrabNebula is doing a lot of the infrastructure around the updating of the apps. Is that what I was hearing before?
Well, I could say something to the extent of CrabNebula has employed full-time to date something like 7 or 8 core engineers to the Tauri project. And we've I mean, Lucas and I, the 2 co-founders of Tauri, the originals, OGs, we built CrabNebula. We knew exactly what people needed. So actually the authors of Tauri and of the Tauri updater and of a majority of the plugins in the Tauri ecosystem are the ones that built the cloud service. And that cloud service, just like I said, drops into your CI, and your CI takes care of all of the rest. It produces the fresh binaries, it produces the updates to old binaries and all of the signatures that are needed, and drops that into the cloud project folder, and it's instantly available all around the planet.
Okay, that's good to know because I can imagine there'd be a lot of people in the corporate world, even how small customers does CrabNebula have, or can you talk about that? Because I'm kind of curious if I'm doing a personal project and I wanted to have this kind of ability, could I, as a single developer, use it, or is it something that's for MNCs, etc.?
We've actually priced it for both. So as an individual developer, you'll have a monthly service charge, and then we do metered billing. So as an individual developer, let's say you've got 50 downloads a month of one app and 100 of another app. This will all go into the organizational billing. So maybe let's say, like me, you also have a hobby project folder in the cloud, and those will all get billed together. And then maybe you have one project that's a professional project that needs to have separate billing. I don't know, like a tax number, business address. You can have a separate organization there. And then you've got distinct billing. And also your usage doesn't pollute the other account, right? So you'd have to look on our website for the up-to-date state of the pricing, but it's something like €8 a month. And the reason why I'm saying something is because taxation is hard across the planet. So depending on where you're located or where your business is located, tax is likely to be slightly different. So check it out. But we've really worked hard to nail the pricing for people who just want to try it out. or who just have a few hobby projects. But also, once you hit scale of hundreds of thousands, millions of downloads, we want it to be something that you can account for. It's not there's not going to be some mysterious charge on your billing because as your apps are downloaded more, the price increases, right?
That definitely makes a lot of sense. You had this interesting topic about how you like to run your organization in terms of when you're actually creating products, right? You have a specific way that you want to upskill people and stuff.
Yeah, you know, statistics lie, right? Like they just lie. You fashion statistics to tell a story. You write narratives to explain things to people. And one of the things that I'm really proud of when I look at the uptime, which is again kind of superficial, but also representative of the services that we offer at CrabNebula, we've got 100% uptime for the last 3 months. And I think there was one event where it wasn't actually downtime. It was the fact that our monitoring service hadn't caught up with the actual uptime of the other product. And building with Rust, it brings its challenges. Performance isn't one of them. And stability is also not one of the problems that Rust has. I think when you're building a new team and you decide like, oh, this is the product and what framework are we going to use for the web? I mean, it's based on the skills of the people, right? Like if it's a React shop, you're probably going to use React. Maybe you're going to use React Native on mobile. On the front end, it's based on the skills that people have. And there's just so many front end engineers out there that you really can pick people that suit you. But when you're a young team, you kind of have to do the same thing. And at CrabNebula, we had this superpower that our founding engineers, the people that started this company with us, were all superstars in Rust. And then the people that we brought to join the team to work on our products, specifically the cloud product, they didn't necessarily have as much Rust skill. But what we found is that through participation in the rest of the team, upskilling became less and less of an issue after, let's say, 3 to 6 months. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that what we decided at CrabNebula is that all products that are new are going to be written in Rust. If there's a UI, we're going to choose solid JS. If it's brownfield or something that we have to consume from a third party, we're going to do our best to make sure it's well maintained, well documented, and that we have options to switch to Rust alternatives down the road. And I think that this hybrid formula is really something that takes careful consideration. I've heard from a lot of people lately that are kind of excited about the Rust hype train, that they're going to just rewrite it all in Rust. But the challenge there is that if you have a product that wasn't written in Rust and you want to rewrite it in Rust, and you're currently serving it in, I don't know, Go or C, or, depends on the project, of course, what invariably ends up happening is products with current roadmaps continue their development, and the rewrite it in Rust product roadmap is trying to catch up. Documentation is never in parity. Features creep and get ignored. And what you end up with are two teams that can barely talk to each other. And that's why I just try to advise everybody who asks me if they should rewrite it in Rust. I'm like, how long does your current implementation have to live? If it's dying right now, like you can't keep up and you have to do something about the performance or the scalability or the stability or whatever it is, then maybe there's a good justification to move to Rust. But for greenfield projects, we always start with Rust. And I think part of this has to do with the tooling, but also the fact that, gosh darn it, I love it when it compiles. And even if I'm not done with my feature at the end of the day, if that code that I've been writing compiles, I can commit the code. Even if there's more work to be done, I can commit it. And I know that my colleague can come and pull the code and build it and run the tests or the benches or whatever it is that we're doing. and not suddenly get slapped in the face with a compiler error, right? And what I think this does, I don't have real statistical data because I don't believe in that stuff necessarily. But what I believe it has is an impact on developer velocity because you have more certainty and you begin and end a day with certainty. If you kind of follow this rusty approach of it compiles and then I can close my laptop, right?
Kind of reminds me of when you mentioned the idea of done, right? This is kind of like a temporary done, no?
You know, little wins are important. And yeah, I mean, it's a temporary done, but it's still a done, right? Like in JavaScript, gosh, I would end a day feeling like, okay, just commit it. I'll lint it later, you know? And here it's a different story, and the compiler helps me so much. And of course, the broader internet and everyone else who's out there who's smarter than me and inside of the team. So I just feel like this fundamental approach to software engineering. Have you ever heard of clean desk, clean screen?
It's just about just having a tidy workspace, this kind of idea.
It's about preventing the leakage of personally identifiable information or key material so that when you leave your desk at work, the home office, there's no USB keys lying around, the screen is shut down, the device is locked. And the reason why I brought that up is because there's a specific kind of hygiene that I tend to find in Rust code that I enjoy. Maybe this is different for other people, but at the end of the day, it compiles. At the beginning of the day, it compiles. And during the day, I'm breaking it or enhancing it and it never broke. I love those days where every time I save the file, every single time, it compiles perfectly. I love it when I have that experience. And that's a very reinforcing experience. Not having the compiler yell at me means I'm doing a good job. I never have that. Okay, maybe with TypeScript, but actually TypeScript I feel is kind of like an angry drunk uncle, you know? And it's just like, "Bleh, no." And I feel like maybe the Rust compiler is a strict but loving auntie, right? Who's just like, Daniel, you know, if you're going to send unsigned 64s across the boundary, you have to use big int. Like where I feel supported and I'm told what I could do better. And when like, I don't have the compiler at my disposal.
Yeah, now that we're kind of approaching the end of our time, I just wanted to kind of ask you, when is 2.0 going to come out? What's the current status?
Sure. So right now, the status as of recording this on August 28th is that Tauri is deep in the RC phase of the release approach to bring us to stable in about 2 weeks. So our hope is that we're able to finish off the documentation that people are going to need in order to use all of the aspects of Tauri. Help is always appreciated if you want to stop by our Discord. That's discord.gg/Tauri. You can stop on by and tell us what's wrong and how wrong we are and help us be less wrong. That would be great. And the last things that we're doing right now are polishing, a little bit of DX and typing out those docs. And in a couple weeks, you'll have a fresh audited Tauri 2.0 that you can either create something brand new or you can run cargo Tauri, migrate, and move your old app into a fresh, shiny container.
All right. Well, it's good to hear back from you because it's been a while since we've caught up. And I'm glad to see that you are 2.0 and you already have plans for a 3.0. So hopefully we'll have you again on when 3.0 starts to roll out. Again, it's good to have you on again and looking forward to the 2.0 release.
We are too. Thanks for having me, Alan.